What's going on, Imperials? It's Emperor Cubone here. Not long ago we looked at which Elite Four members might be considered the worst, but we shook things up a little bit in viewing them by rank, meaning we compared all of the first ones together in a group and so on all the way up the chain to champion. So then that begs the question, which one of those would be the best? It can be a bit trickier than you might think, but let's see who we have in the running. At the first rank we have Lorelei, Will, Sydney, Aaron, Chantal, Malva, Hala and Mullane from Alola, Beedee and Galar, and Rika. That's right, we will not be counting any of the Blueberry Academy folks because while they are technically in a version of an Elite Four, it's not nearly the same thing to be at the top of your little school club as it is to be a ranking member of your region's government. You may not agree, but if they were already good enough to beat Unova's Elite Four, that's where they would be instead of being at school here. Children are clearly allowed, but they just didn't make the cut. Now last time we already talked about how bad some of these first ones are, so no need to rehash those failures, but there are some good ones too. I mean, by this point you've already beaten all of the gyms, so it's not like the initial Elite Four member needs to introduce anything. Their main job is to set the tone for how difficult this final challenge might be. I liked Rika pretty well in Scarlet and Violet, and actually Aaron's Platinum team is quite an improvement over before. I do think in Unova, Chantal is actually quite impressive with some of the strongest, hardest hitting ghosts, mixed with some bulky ones to soak up hits, so she is no slouch. Her only real restriction being the fewer Pokémon at lower levels, so instead we'll say that the best is probably Mullane. The first point in his favor is the surprise factor of simply being there, replacing Hala, which is already good because he was so awful at it, but the shock of having to face a malnourished steel specialist is only part of it, because he actually puts up quite a fight. Firstly, all of his Pokémon have 4 moves, so he's already doing better than some Alolan trainers, but he also starts the battle with a Clef Key to set up spikes and reflect like an actual VGC player might do. And he also goes on to cover his own weaknesses. Like with Bisharp being quad weak to fighting, well, he's got a Metagross to try and counter that. And if you're trying to use the fire type, he's also got an Alolan Dugtrio to quickly blast out some ground type attacks. Granted, if you use ground, there's not much counter for that, but remember that the vast majority of the Alola roster are ridiculously slow, so most of the Pokémon that you'll likely be using will have to wait for these older Pokémon to move first. So I think it's unquestionable that Mullane was a huge step up for the Alola Pokémon League, as he's definitely going to put a bigger dent in your team than Hala ever would. At the second rank, we have Bruno, Koga, Phoebe, Bertha, Grimsley, Seabold, Olivia, Nessa and Galar, and Poppy. The second spot has maybe the highest concentration of disappointments, however they're not all bad like Olivia. She's a competent kahuna with a decent spread of type coverage used, including some solid alternates in the Ultra games. However, most of her Pokémon don't have a full moveset in either game, so she can't really be the overall best. Poppy actually looks pretty good here too, having real counters to ground unlike the last Steel user, but ultimately I think I'm going to say that Grimsley might sneakily be the best. I certainly never paid much attention to the Unova Dark-type user, however he seems to at least have read a strategy guide or two, having a Liepard that has Fake Out and Attract, so that'll put people off balance right from the start. And the Pure Dark Liepard would arguably be his worst Pokémon, with 3 other strong attackers introduced in Gen 5, like the powerful Crocodile. I will admit that a big portion of the selection stems from the fact that we've never had to face an Elite Grimsley since the introduction of the Fairy type. Maybe the most effective counter to the Dark type simply did not exist in the Black and White games, leaving only Fighting and Bug to be threats, but even then 2 of Grimsley's Pokémon have Flying type coverage to handle them. And when we eventually do see him with Fairies, I think Scrafty was anticipating that, packing Poison Jab right from the start. And of course, Bisharp's half Steel typing covers Fairies quite well also. And all of this is not even considering the Challenge Mode changes to his team that only improves him further. Like I said, I never really could even remember Grimsley much until he visited Alola, but he is remarkably proficient as a leading specialist in his region. Now for the number 3 spot, we have Agatha, Bruno again, Glacia, Flint, Caitlyn, Drasna, Acerola, Bee or Alistair in different versions, and of course Larry. Now, I will say despite being on the back foot by not having much Ghost to work with, Agatha does a decent job, and she only keeps improving over time, like, say, using a Weezing that spams Shadow Ball, or even Alolan Marowak, so she is decent, and likewise Acerola is another good Ghost-type trainer. However, I think we have to give the title of best to Larry. As much as people connected with Larry in his gym battle, he's not actually great there, with none of his Pokémon having full movesets, and his Ace only having 2 attacks, but he really steps it up for his second job in the league. The first major point of notice is his changing types from normal to flying so that he could still use his beloved Staraptor, but I'm wondering if flying was his initial passion anyway, because he really puts in the effort into his elite team, each one having a different secondary typing and pulling out some crazy random coverage that you would not expect. Tropius gets to have Dragon Pulse, the actual dragon type Altaria gets to have Flamethrower, the electric Oricorio has Icy Wind of all things, and then his Flamigo gets extra special coverage with Throat Chop and Liquidation. They have their own attacks to take out rock or ice type foes. Not so much for any electric attacks that you might use, but at least 2 of them would take neutral damage from electric anyway, and the Fruit Dinosaur has Sunny Day to spam Solar Beams. You might say that it's so late in the game that you can just one-hit KO everything by then, but you've got to respect the hustle for having 2 full-time positions in the same region, single-handedly holding up Paldea on his own overworked shoulders. In the 4th station, we have Lance, Karen, Drake, Lucian, Marshall, Wickstrom, Kahili, Raihan, and Hassel. Right off, I don't love Marshall's team since he's only got pure fighting types in both games, and he further limits himself by his Sock and Conkeldurr sharing 3 moves. Like, what's the point of them even being different Pokémon? I do find Kahili to be pretty good from Alola when all of her Pokémon have unique secondary typings, but a lot of her Pokémon just have one questionable move, like Skarmory just has regular old Slash instead of any flying attacks, and Toucannon does make great use of Skill Link with multiple moves, but it also has Screech for some reason. While she does improve slightly, the problems still carry over to her Ultra team, so we just missed out on having 2 flying specialists in the top slots. So I am quite astounded that I have convinced myself that the best Elite Four member at the 4th rank is in fact Lucian. I was not anticipating him going into this, but after mentioning him last time I really got to looking at him, and I'm finding out that there is in fact a reason that I lost to him so many times as a kid. To start, he's the first trainer in the Sinnoh region to have a Pokemon at level 60, so you might have to go out and grind a little bit after breezing through the rest of the game. I know that I had to go do that after bashing my head against the wall losing to him for so long, so that I could actually stand a chance. But Lucian's persona of a bookworm is clearly not just for show because he's got plenty of strategies up his sleeve. He starts out with Mr. Mime to set up screens, and then in order to combat the dark types that are coming in, he's also got a Medicham or Gallade, always packing a fighting type. And even his Alakazam harnesses Focus Blast for a big special hit as well. But if you're going to try the Ghost type, he's also got a Girafarig who's immune to Ghost, who also has Light Screen and Trick Room and Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, but you know, if we're gonna be looking that far ahead, then his Mr. Mime would also become a Fairy type to help out with those Dark type opponents as well. And of course, his most prominent Pokemon, his Bronzong, is great. Sometimes also having Trick Room so that it can actually outspeed your team, but back in Gen 4 when Steel still resisted Dark and Ghost, Bronzong's only weaknesses were ground and fire, and since his has the levitate ability, it forces you to use the fire. But Lucian's Bronzong is always packing Earthquake to take out either of those types in the Sinnoh region. So Lucian may not be the flashiest or most memorable Elite Four member, but that's just because he's busy making sure that he can get the job done to the best of his ability, and he might just be the last gasp of Psychic celebrating as the top type before it loses that crown. Now, as for the champions, we see Blue, Lance, Steven, and Wallace, Cynthia, Iris, Diantha, Kukui and Hao, Leon, and Geeta. Now, yes, Alder technically is a champion, but you never really face him as one in the main story of the games, the same way that I'm not going to count Mustard on this list just because he used to be the champ and we never fought him. Plus, it's not like he would crack the best anyway with half of his team being the bug type. So who is the best? Well, Hoenn has 2 pretty good champions in Steven and Wallace. I like Wallace a little less because the water type is a bit more limiting, but Steven's team of steel types complemented perfectly by the fossils is superb. Normally, I would have a problem that a Pokemon like his Aggron has 0 stab moves, but his moveset is just too good for me to care. Of course, I just wanted you to know how much I appreciate him before we go on to talk about Cynthia. It has become increasingly popular nowadays to say, oh, Cynthia wasn't that hard, but being contrarian into everyone else doesn't make you cool, especially when you're wrong. My girl starts the battle with Spiritomb, who, as you may remember, had no weaknesses until the recent remakes. So immediately you're scrambling to find a quality strategy to take on something that you couldn't possibly prepare for. And then you're thrown into the fray with a plethora of strong Pokémon that have all different types, movesets, and even playstyles. Her Pokémon also have counters for their own weaknesses. Her Gastrodon packs Sludge Bomb, her Roserade has Shadow Ball, even Milotic has Ice Beam. And yes, she may have borrowed that Pokémon from the last champion in Emerald, but rather than being random, it's almost a clever nod to the last time that you had a battle that was this tough. I also appreciate when she got her Togekiss, even though it was not a fairy type yet, it still put in a lot of work. And it goes to show you how well she treats her Pokémon to have it reach its final form after full happiness. But of course, we cannot forget her signature Garchomp. The pseudo-legendary Landshark is a tough opponent even with the quad weakness to Ice because of its strength and speed, and any version has great interchangeable moves that will be helpful in taking you down. And I haven't really mentioned this yet, but Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl's Elite Four all have items like a real-life team would use. Like how her Lucario has the Wise Glasses mixed with Nasty Plot, or Milotic using a Flame Orb paired with the Marvel Scale ability. And of course her Garchomp is holding a Yachi Berry that will dampen the power of ice attacks, and make sure that it'll get off at least one strong hit. So a varied team with complementing strengths and synergistic strategies on top of a phenomenal soundtrack means that Cynthia definitely earns the admiration that she's received over the years as an impressive champion, as she is still likely the best one that we have seen to this day. And yes, that does mean that Sinnoh has taken 2 of these spots, but that's just the way things shake out, and it shows you that you ought to respect Sinnoh more than you probably do. So those are the best Elite Four members at each rank. It might be fun to combine them all into one challenge someday. Which Elite Four members would you say are the best? Let me know down in the comments. Also be sure to leave a like, share this video, and subscribe so that you too can become an Imperial today. And until next time, stay grounded.